The night before my accident, my sister called me 3 times. I missed the first 2. I picked up the third. She said nothing was wrong, she just wanted to hear my voice. She said she loved me and to drive safe the next day and to text her when I got home. I thought it was sweet. I know now what it actually was. It was her checking to make sure I was still coming. It was her making sure the plan was still on. And the most terrifying part, the part that keeps me up at night even now, she sounded completely normal. She laughed at something I said. She asked about my dog. She told me a story about something funny that happened at work. You would have believed her too. I believed her my whole life. My name is Rachel Danielle Holloway, and the night I almost died, the person who arranged it was the last person who told me she loved me. I grew up in Clarksville, Tennessee. If you've never been, it's the kind of town that feels bigger than it is from the inside and smaller than it is from the outside. Everybody knows everybody's business, and most people are either related to you by blood or by the kind of proximity that might as well be. The church parking lots fill up on Sunday mornings, and the high school football games fill up on Friday nights, and in between, life moves slow and steady like the Cumberland River. We were not wealthy people, but we were not struggling people either. My father, Thomas Holloway, drove a delivery truck for over 2 decades. Same company, same route, same cracked vinyl seat he'd been meaning to get fixed for 10 years. He was a man of routine and reliability and quiet, consistent love. The kind of man who showed up, always showed up, for school plays and parent-teacher conferences, and every single ordinary Tuesday that nobody thinks to remember until the person is gone, and suddenly every ordinary Tuesday feels like a whole. He used to say, every single evening without fail when he walked through the door, "Still standing, baby girl?" And I would say, "Still standing, Daddy." It was our thing, just ours. My sister used to roll her eyes at it. My mother never acknowledged it at all. But it was the thing that made me feel most like myself, most like I belonged somewhere in the world. That small, repeated question, that small, repeated answer. He died of a heart attack 2 weeks after my 19th birthday. He was 51 years old, and the hole he left was not the kind that fills. My mother, Sandra Holloway, was a woman of a particular and specific type. I have spent years trying to find the right words for her, and the closest I have come is this. She was a woman who understood exactly what she was worth to people and exactly what they were worth to her, and she conducted every relationship accordingly. She was beautiful, uncommonly beautiful even into her 50s, tall, sharp-featured, with the kind of posture that makes a room feel like it should stand up straighter. People were drawn to her. They always were. She had this quality of attention. When she looked at you, really looked at you, you felt chosen, significant. The problem was that she looked at you like that when she needed something, and when she didn't, she looked through you like glass. She was not violent, she was not a screamer, she never broke things or made scenes. She was something quieter and more corrosive than that. The kind of person who can make you feel over a long enough period of time that everything wrong in your life is fundamentally your own fault. A word here, a sigh there, a certain way of not responding when you needed her to respond. A way of remembering your failures with perfect precision and forgetting your efforts entirely. I spent 34 years trying to be enough for her. I was not. I know that now. And then there was Danielle, my sister, 2 years older, 2 feet taller in presence if not in height, the kind of person people called magnetic, and meant it, because she had this pull to her that was real and unmanufactured. She could make strangers feel like old friends inside of 5 minutes. She could make a boring Tuesday feel like a party. She was funny in the sharp, quick way that catches you off guard, and generous in the loud, warm way that makes you feel like you're the most important person in the room. And she loved me. Or at least she did something that felt so much like love for so many years that I never taught to question whether it was real. She taught me to ride a bike on our driveway on a Saturday in August when I was 6 years old.
She stayed up with me the night I got my heart broken for the first time at 16, eating cereal on the floor of her bedroom and telling me that boys were idiots and that I deserved better, and meaning it enough that I actually believed her. She was my person. I thought she would always be my person. I want to tell you that I saw it coming, but I didn't. Not until it was almost too late. So let me start at the beginning of the end. Let me start with the money my father left me, and the plan my family built around it while I was living my life completely unawares, thinking I was safe. My father had a life insurance policy, $180,000, 20-plus years of payments, and when he died, my mother collected every cent. That was right and fair, and nobody questioned it. Not me, not any of the aunts and uncles who gathered at our house in those blurry weeks after the funeral, drinking coffee and talking too loud and bringing more casseroles than any human family could ever consume. Life insurance was for the widow. That was understood. What was not understood, what was not known by anyone in that house, anyone in that family, anyone in that town, was what my father told me in my last visit with him in the hospital 10 days before he died. He was already on oxygen, already diminished in the physical way that feels so wrong on a big, solid man like my father, like the world has been adjusted to the wrong scale. He looked small against the pillow in a way that broke my heart every time I walked through that door. But his eyes were clear. He waited until the nurse left the room, he waited until it was just the two of us, and then he reached out and took my hand in both of his, those big, rough, cardboard and engine oil hands, and he said, "Rachel, I need you to listen careful." I said, "Okay, Daddy." He told me about the account. He'd opened it in my name when I was 8 years old, a savings account at a small bank in a town 30 miles from Clarksville, a branch he'd chosen specifically because nobody we knew banked there. He'd been depositing money, not much, sometimes just $40 or $60 a month, quietly, consistently, the way he did everything. The balance, as of that conversation, was $94,000. I remember staring at him. I remember not knowing what to say. He said, "That's yours, not the family's, not your mother's, not Danny's, yours. Your daddy worked for that money and I put it aside for you because I know, I have always known, that you're going to need a soft place to land someday that nobody else is going to give you." I asked him what he meant. He just squeezed my hand harder. He said, "Promise me you won't tell them. Promise me you'll keep it somewhere safe and you won't let them pressure you into anything." I promised. He died 11 days later. I kept the account exactly where it was. I didn't move it, didn't touch it, didn't tell a single person it existed. I followed his instructions to the letter, not because I thought I would ever need to, but because it was the last thing he'd asked me to do, and I would have done anything he asked me. For the first year after his death, nothing happened. I went back to Nashville, back to my apartment, my job, my routine. I visited my mother and Danny when it felt sustainable and kept the visits short enough to avoid the particular kind of exhaustion that came from spending too long in that house. Life continued. And then, 13 months after my father's funeral, something shifted. I don't know exactly when my mother figured it out. I have thought about this a lot. Whether she always suspected, whether my father had let something slip, whether there was a document somewhere she found while sorting through his things that pointed her in the right direction. I don't know the answer. I probably never will. What I do know is that in September, 16 months after my father died, my mother started calling me regularly for the first time in my adult life. Twice a week, sometimes 3 times. She was attentive in a way she had never been, asking about my health, my apartment, my social life, sending me articles she thought I'd find interesting, which was completely unprecedented. She even sent me a card on my birthday that year with a handwritten note inside, not just a signature, but actual sentences. I was moved by it. I am embarrassed to admit how moved I was. I wanted so badly to believe that grief had softened her, that losing my father had cracked something open in her and let a different version of herself out.
I wanted to believe that at 33 years old, I was finally getting the mother I had spent my whole life reaching for. That is the cruelest thing about people like my mother. They know exactly where the wound is, and they know exactly how to press it. The first direct mention of money came in October. She had invited me home for what she called a proper Sunday dinner, which meant pot roast and sweet tea, and the kind of deliberate normalcy that felt in retrospect like a stage set. Danny was there. Everything was warm and pleasant and carefully, almost architecturally arranged. We were halfway through eating when my mother set down her fork, folded her hands, and looked at me with those eyes. "Rachel," she said, "I've been going through your father's paperwork." I kept my expression neutral. "Okay," I said. "There are some things that don't quite add up, financially speaking." She paused. "I think Thomas may have had accounts we don't know about, and I think, knowing how close the two of you were, that if anyone would know, it would be you." I looked at my plate. I said, "I honestly don't know what you're talking about, Mama." She looked at me for a long moment, and then she smiled, that patient, measured chess player smile, and said, "Well, if anything comes to mind." She picked her fork back up. Danny refilled my wine glass without meeting my eyes. I drove home that night going 80 miles an hour on the interstate because I needed to get away from that house as fast as physics would allow. What followed was 3 months of escalating pressure wrapped in the language of love and family obligation. My mother mentioned the finances again in November, more directly. She talked about how difficult things had become since my father passed, about the cost of maintaining the house, about how surely Thomas would have wanted to take care of his family. Danny called me separately to echo the same themes, softer and more sympathetic in her framing, but arriving at the identical conclusion that if I knew anything, if there was anything I could do to help Mama through this, this would be the time. I held my ground. I kept my answers vague and my visits short. And then, in December, the calls stopped. Both of them. My mother, my sister. Silence. I should have been relieved. I was not, because I knew my mother, and Sandra Holloway did not go quiet when she surrendered. She went quiet when she was building something. January and February passed like held breath. I worked, I went to the gym, I took Biscuit on longer walks than usual because movement helped when the anxiety was high, and the anxiety was high a lot those months. I called my friend Tanya every Sunday, who was the kind of friend who could tell something was wrong just from the way I said hello, and who would sit on the phone with me for 2 hours without once making me feel like a burden for needing her help. I did not call my mother. I did not call my sister. I kept telling myself I was waiting for something to make sense, for the pressure to resolve into something I could understand and address directly. I wasn't ready to name out loud what I was afraid of, because naming it felt like making it real, and I was not ready for it to be real. On February 28th, a Friday evening, just after I got home from work, my phone rang. Unknown number, Nashville area code. I almost didn't pick up. I picked up. The man on the other end introduced himself as Derek Caulfield. His voice was the kind of professionally pleasant that feels laminated, smooth and consistent and completely without texture. He said he was a financial and estate planning consultant. He said my sister Danielle had referred him. He said he'd love to set up a time to sit down and discuss some planning opportunities for inherited assets. I said, very calmly, that I wasn't interested. He apologized for the intrusion, said he hoped I'd keep his number in case I changed my mind, and hung up. I stood in my kitchen with my phone in my hand for a long time. Estate planning. My father had been dead for over a year. I was 34 years old, unmarried, no children, renting an apartment. There was no estate to plan unless you knew or suspected that there was a specific sum of money somewhere with my name on it. I called my bank the next morning. I changed my login credentials, updated my security questions, added a verbal password to my account. the kind of additional verification layer you request when you're worried about someone attempting unauthorized access. The woman who helped me asked if everything was okay. I said I was just being cautious. She said, "Smart girl." I made a note of Derek Caulfield's number and looked him up that night. His professional footprint was minimal, a sparse website, no verified reviews, no clear affiliation with any established financial firm. He was listed as a notary public in Davidson County. A notary, not a financial consultant. A person whose professional function is to witness and authenticate the signing of legal documents. I sat with that information for a long time. And then I did something I'm not sure I fully understood the reason for at the time, but which I now believe was some deep, instinctive part of me trying to protect itself before my conscious mind had fully caught up. I called a lawyer. Not for any specific purpose. I didn't have any evidence of anything. I couldn't make any real accusations. I just called a family law attorney named Patricia Hughes, whose name I found through the Tennessee Bar Association, made an appointment for the following week, and told her in broad strokes about the account, my family's pressure campaign, and the strange phone call. Patricia listened carefully. She asked a few precise questions, and then she said something I have thought about many times since. "Rachel, in my experience, when a family member becomes this organized around another family member's finances, it rarely stops at pressure. I would strongly recommend you document everything going forward, every call, every conversation, every contact. And under no circumstances should you sign anything, meet with anyone, or make any financial decisions under duress." I thanked her and drove home. I started keeping a notes file on my phone that same evening. March arrived, and on March 3rd, a Tuesday, I walked into a coffee shop near my office building for my regular morning order and found my sister already sitting inside. Corner table, already there, dressed sharply, hair done, smiling at me like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Hey, stranger," she said. I hesitated in the doorway for just a second, just a fraction of a second, and then I went over, because she was my sister, because 11 days out of 12, the gravity of loving someone is stronger than the gravity of being afraid of them. We sat together for almost an hour. It was, genuinely, a good hour in many ways. She was funny, she was warm, she asked about my job with real interest and laughed at the right moments, and told me a story about our cousin Marcus and a fender bender in a church parking lot that had me crying laughing into my coffee. It felt real. I don't know even now whether any of it was real. Right before we left, she reached across the table and took my hand. "Rachel," she said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you not to get upset." I waited. "Mama is not doing well. And I don't mean financially. I mean she's not doing well, like mentally. She's not eating right, she's talking about Daddy constantly. She has his things laid out on the bed sometimes like she's expecting him to come home and just needs them to be ready." I felt my chest tighten, not with suspicion, with guilt, because this was the button. This had always been the button. The idea that my mother was suffering and I was not doing enough. Danny continued. "She keeps asking about loose ends, things she feels like haven't been resolved, and I really think that if you could come home, spend a real..."
I have spent months trying to understand what she meant by them. Danny and I sat at the kitchen table for almost another full hour after our mother went to bed. This part, this last hour, is the part I hold on to sometimes when the grief and the anger are competing and I don't know which one to let win. Because it was real, that hour, or it felt real. We watched a ridiculous video she'd saved on her phone. We talked about Marcus again. At one point, we got on the subject of our childhood dog, a beagle named Chester, who had the most dramatic, theatrical response to thunderstorms of any animal I have ever encountered in my life, and who we had both loved unreasonably. And we laughed until Danny had tears running down her face. That laugh, I keep coming back to that laugh. It was real. I know it was real, and I cannot reconcile it with what she did 40 minutes later, which is something I suspect I will be working on in therapy for the rest of my life. At 10:33 p.m., I said I should get on the road. Danny walked me to my car. The rain had been going for hours, and the driveway was shimmering with it, the porch light making everything look slightly too bright and slightly too still. Danny hugged me at my car door, long, tight, her face pressed against my hair. "Drive safe," she said. "I will," I said. "I'll text you when I get home." She didn't say anything to that. I got in my car. I backed out of the driveway. I turned south on Route 9. The road was dark and wet and quiet. No other cars at first, just my headlights and the rain and the wipers keeping their steady count. I remember thinking about the drive home. I remember thinking I'd call Tanya when I got closer to Nashville. I remember thinking the pot roast had actually been good and that I was going to be hungry again by midnight and wondering if the Thai place near my apartment was still doing late delivery. These are the kinds of thoughts you have in the minutes before your life changes. Completely ordinary thoughts, a nothing Tuesday kind of inner monologue. The Miller Creek Bridge was maybe 4 miles ahead when I noticed the headlights. In my rearview mirror, close, but not alarming, somebody else on a Thursday night heading south. I noted them and looked back at the road. And then they accelerated. Not a little. Not the way someone does when they're late and trying to make up time. They accelerated the way something accelerates when it is aimed. I had maybe 3 seconds to register it as wrong, and then the impact came. It came from behind, slightly to the driver's side at a speed I later learned was estimated at 67 miles per hour. My car went through the guardrail like it was made of cardboard. I remember a half second of suspension, not physical suspension, something stranger than that, like time itself went soft, and then the rolling, the sound of metal on asphalt, and then metal on grass, and then nothing, nothing, nothing. I woke up to white acoustic tile, fluorescent light, the smell of antiseptic and blood. I did not know where I was. I did not know how much time had passed. I did not know in those first few seconds that I was alive in any meaningful sense of the word. I just knew that there was sensation, which meant something. And then, through the curtain, I heard voices. My body felt like it had been rebuilt wrong. That is the only way I can describe it. Like someone had taken me apart and put me back together without the instructions. Everything recognizable, but slightly off in a way that made simple functions feel impossible. Breathing was the worst of it. Every inhale made something in my chest catch, drag, pull in a way that sent white sparks across my vision. 3 broken ribs, I would learn later, a fractured skull, a collapsed left lung, a laceration on my scalp that required 18 stitches, bruising across almost 60% of my body. But I was conscious, and I could hear. I kept my eyes closed. I don't know exactly why. Some part of me that was operating below language, below thought, making decisions my rational mind hadn't caught up to yet. I just knew, in the way you know things you don't have words for, that I should not move, that I should not be known to be awake. And then I heard my mother's voice. She was speaking to someone on the other side of the curtain, a man's voice I didn't recognize, calm and clinical in the way of people who spend their working lives in emergencies, a doctor I would learn later, or a physician's assistant. My mother said, "Is she going to make it?" The man said, "She's critical. We're working to stabilize her. The head injury is the primary concern right now." "I understand," my mother said. And then, with a pause no longer than a breath, she said, "If it goes the other way, I want you to know that we understand. She's been a burden for a very long time. There are people in this ER who need those resources more than she does. Don't exhaust yourselves." Voice breaks, just slightly. Recovers. I have played those words back in my mind more times than I can count. She's been a burden for a very long time. I was her daughter. I was lying 3 feet away. I had driven 40 miles in the rain to have dinner with her.
and she was standing on the other side of a hospital curtain telling a doctor to not save me. I did not move. I did not cry, not yet. I breathed very slowly through the wet resistance in my chest, and I kept my face completely still, and I committed to the performance of unconsciousness like it was the most important role I had ever played in my life. Because something in me, not thought, not calculation, just pure animal survival instinct, understood that if she knew I was awake, it would make things worse. I did not know how much worse, but I knew. I listened to the doctor respond, carefully, professionally, something about obligations to all patients regardless of circumstance. I heard my mother's voice go cooler and more clipped. I heard a nurse excuse herself. I heard the kind of institutional silence that hospitals carry. Beeping equipment, distant movement, the particular quality of air in a place where life and death are in constant, adjacent negotiation. And then I heard the door. New footsteps, and my sister's voice. She's alive, my mother said, flat, like a fact she was processing. Danny made a sound I had never heard her make before, something between a breath and a word that didn't quite become either. Danny, my mother's voice, quiet, sharp as wire. Look at me. Pause. She looked right at my headlights, Mama. Danny's voice. It was not the voice from the dinner table. It was not the voice that had laughed about Chester and the thunderstorms an hour ago. It was lower, fraying at the edges. Before I hit her, she looked right at them. If she wakes up, she's going to know it wasn't Danielle. Silence. My mother's voice dropped to something I'd never heard from her before. Not anger, not fear, but something colder and more controlled than either. She said, "How fast were you going?" Maybe 65? The road was wet. I didn't think Did anyone see you? I don't think so. I drove past. The car was against the embankment. I didn't see her moving. You thought wrong. She's alive. The silence that followed was the longest of my life. And then Danny said, in a voice so small I almost didn't hear it, "What do we do?" And then my mother said, "We wait. And we don't say another word about it in this building." Then a pause, and the words that collapsed everything. We talked about this. There it was, the whole shape of it, not a moment of rage, not an impulse born from a bad night or a bad conversation, a plan, a considered, deliberate, coordinated plan worked out between my mother and my sister over some span of weeks or months while I was in Nashville walking my dog and going to work and thinking my family was difficult but ultimately fundamentally mine. A plan to end my life and collect what was left. I lay on that gurney. I did not move. I listened to everything. My mother spoke to the next nurse who came in with warmth and worry and the perfect cadence of maternal concern. "She's all we have left since her father passed. We're just so grateful for everything you're doing." Danny said almost nothing. I could hear her breathing, unsteady, jagged, and I stored that away too. When they were finally asked to move to the family waiting area, I heard my mother's footsteps go without hesitation. I heard Danny's pause at the curtain. Just for a second. And then she left too. And for the first time since I had regained consciousness, I was alone. I opened my eyes. I looked at the ceiling, and I cried, completely silently, tears running sideways off my face, my body shaking in increments small enough to not engage my broken ribs, because I was fooled.
Terrified and in agony, and because the grief of it, the sheer obliterating grief of what I had just heard, needed somewhere to go, and there was nowhere for it to go but out. I gave it 30 seconds. 30 seconds to feel it. And then I stopped. Because I was still alive, and I intended to stay that way. A nurse came to check my vitals approximately 4 minutes later. She was young, mid-20s maybe, tight natural hair, kind eyes, a name tag that said Priya in careful block letters. She came around the curtain with a clipboard and a professional air of efficiency that shifted the moment she registered my open eyes.
She came closer immediately. "Hey," she said, softly. "Hey, you're awake. Can you hear me?" "Yes," I said. My voice was barely audible, not from choice, but from the pure physical reality of what breathing cost me in that moment. "You're at Baycrest Regional. You were in a car accident. Do you know your name?" "Rachel Holloway." "Okay, Rachel, we're going to take care of you. Just..." "There are 2 women in the family waiting room, my mother and my sister." "Yes, they came in with..." "I need you to lock this room," I said. "I need you to not let them in here, and I need you to find a police officer." She went very still. She looked at me carefully, not with skepticism exactly, but with the particular attention of someone trying to assess whether what they're hearing is confusion or clarity. I held her gaze. Whatever she saw in my face was enough. "Okay," she said. "Okay, don't move, I'll be right back." She left. She returned in under 3 minutes with a security officer and a charge nurse. Within 20 minutes, there were 2 Nashville Metro police officers in my room. I gave my statement from that hospital bed, slowly, carefully, stopping when my chest made the wrong sound, picking back up when I could. I told them everything: the inheritance, the financial pressure, the phone call from Derek Caulfield, the dinner, the headlights in my rearview mirror, and every word I had heard through that curtain. Every word. The officers listened without interrupting. When I finished, one of them, a woman, Officer Denise Carroll, who had the particular quality of stillness that I associate with people who have heard terrible things and have not let it make them hard, said to me, "Miss Holloway, I want you to know that you did exactly the right thing." I didn't feel like I had done the right thing. I felt like I was falling from a very great height and hadn't hit the ground yet. But I said thank you, and I closed my eyes. They detained my mother and sister in the family waiting room for questioning. Danny held on about 40 minutes. I have thought about this a lot, about the fact that she broke and what that means, whether it was guilt or fear or simply the collapse of a person who'd done something they couldn't outrun. She was never good under pressure, my sister. That magnetic, easy confidence was real in the world she'd built for herself, a world where she controlled the narrative, where her version of events was the one that got believed. This was not that world. She confessed to the impact. She told investigators she had been driving behind me on Route 9 and accelerated into my vehicle deliberately, believing the resulting accident would be attributed to the road conditions. She said it had been planned. She said she and my mother had discussed it on multiple occasions over a period of several weeks. She said they believed if I died intestate that my mother would be able to access my accounts through the estate process. What she didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that 6 weeks before March 14th, I had updated my will, something Patricia Hughes, my attorney, had quietly suggested I do during our meeting. I had left the full contents of that account to Tanya, just to keep it out of reach. Derek Caulfield, the man who had called me in February, was indeed a notary public, not a financial consultant. Investigators discovered he had been engaged by my mother to prepare documents related to a potential competency challenge, paperwork that would have formed the legal basis for contesting my control over the inherited account. He cooperated with investigators quickly and fully. What the investigation ultimately revealed was a plan that had been in development at least November. My mother had identified the account through a combination of my father's old paperwork and what she described as an educated guess about Thomas's habits. She had engaged Caulfield to build a legal strategy. When that strategy stalled, because I wouldn't cooperate, and because Caulfield told her a competency challenge without supporting evidence was unlikely to succeed, she and Danny had moved to something else, something more permanent. I spent 41 days at Baycrest Regional, 3 surgeries, a chest tube, weeks of occupational and physical therapy that were, in their own grinding way, almost harder than the hospital itself because they required me to be conscious and present and working when everything else, everything I was trying not to think about during the exercises and the breathing treatments and the small incremental victories of being able to walk to the end of the hallway, was still so loud inside me. Tanya came on the second day. She drove from Nashville with a bag full of things I hadn't thought to ask for: my favorite sweatshirt, Biscuit's collar to hold when I needed it, a specific brand of chapstick I'd been using for 15 years, a playlist she'd made on her phone called Rachel's Getting Through This, with no further explanation. She stayed for 4 days. She came back every weekend after that. That is what love looks like. The grief came in stages, and it was not the grief I expected. I expected to grieve the accident, the pain, the fear, the physical ordeal of recovery. I expected to grieve the loss of my family in the concrete, legal, finalized sense of the word. What I was not prepared for was the grief of revision, the going back through every memory I had and understanding it differently. Every birthday, every phone call, every moment I had felt seen or loved or chosen by my mother and had held it like something precious. Were any of those moments real? I still don't have a full answer to that question. My therapist, a woman named Dr. Alicia Crane, who has the patience of someone who has chosen their work very deliberately, and the directness of someone who will not let you minimize your own experience, says that the question of whether a person's love was real is less important than the question of whether it was safe, and that loving someone is not the same as being good for them. I am still learning to hold both of those things at once. There are details of the legal proceedings I cannot walk you through here, for reasons that are both personal and practical. What I can tell you is that my mother and sister were charged. What I can tell you is that the proceedings were long and painful in the way that legal proceedings involving family always are. Not dramatic, not like television, but grinding and exhausting with paper and waiting. What I can tell you is that Gerald Pitts, the man who stopped his car on a rainy Thursday night on Route 9 and called 911 and held my hand in the dark, came to find me. He didn't have to. Nobody asked him to. He tracked down my information through the hospital and sent a letter, and then I called him, and then we met for coffee at a diner in Gallatin on a Wednesday afternoon in June, and he was exactly the kind of man I should have known he would have been from his actions. Retired, soft-spoken, a little embarrassed by the attention. He said he'd just done what anyone would do. I told him that wasn't true. He thought about that for a moment. Then he said, "Well, I'm glad you made it." I said, "Me too." I bought a house, small, in a quiet neighborhood outside Nashville. Blue shutters, which I chose because blue is a color I have always loved, and I am at an age where I refuse to make choices based on anything other than what I actually want. There is a backyard big enough for Biscuit to run a ridiculous amount, which he does every morning like he is being timed. There is a garden that is, at time of speaking, surviving despite my consistent overwatering and some aphid drama I'm dealing with one day at a time. I still work in hospital administration, which some people find surprising given everything. I don't. I find it comforting, honestly. The machinery of care, the people who chose to do this work, the particular kind of grace that lives in a building full of people who are trying to keep other people alive. I look at it differently than I used to. I notice things I didn't notice before. I notice nurses like Priya. I have been asked, more times than I can count in the months since everything happened, whether I hate them. My mother, my sister. The honest answer is that I don't have a clean feeling about either of them, and I've stopped trying to find one. Hate is too simple. Grief is closer, but grief implies a loss of something that actually existed, and I'm not so sure what was real. What I have most days is something more like a quiet and permanent understanding, a knowing that lives in the body rather than the mind, that some people are capable of things you cannot explain into sense, and that surviving them is not about understanding them. It's about continuing.
still standing, as my father would say. My father put money away for 22 years to make sure I had a soft place to land. He was right that I would need it. He was right that I would have to fight to keep it. What he couldn't have known, what I couldn't have known lying on that gurney in the dark trying to breathe through broken ribs, was that the fighting would make me someone I didn't know I could be. Someone who does not apologize for existing. Someone who answers her own
Are capable of things you cannot explain into sense, and that surviving them is not about understanding them. It's about continuing, still standing, as my father would say. My father put money away for 22 years to make sure I had a soft place to land. He was right that I would need it. He was right that I would have to fight to keep it. What he couldn't have known, what I couldn't have known lying on that gurney in the dark trying to breathe through broken ribs, was that the fighting would make me someone I didn't know I could be. Someone who does not apologize for existing. Someone who does not calibrate her worth against the opinions of people who were counting her money while she was trying to love them. Someone who answers her own question. Still standing, Daddy. Still standing. If you are listening to this and something in it feels familiar, not the specifics, but the shape of it, the feeling of loving someone and not being sure if they love you back or love what you represent, the exhaustion of trying to be enough for people who have decided, for their own reasons, that you never will be, I want to say something to you directly. Your life has value that exists completely outside of what you can give, provide, leave behind, or sign over. You are not a resource. You are not a burden. You are not a problem to be solved by someone else's plan. You are a person, and you deserve people around you who know the difference. My name is Rachel Danielle Holloway. I am 35 years old. I have a dog named Biscuit and a garden that is doing its best. And I am still here. If this story moved you, please subscribe, leave a comment. I read every one. And if someone in your life needs to hear today that they matter, that they are not a burden, that they are worth saving, send them this. Take care of yourselves. I'll see you next time.